Well, good morning, dear students. We are back again, and we will continue with the story. You remember, Sado was performing the operation, and Hana was helping him. So we start from here. No more anesthetic, he told Hana. He turned as swiftly as though he had never uh, paused, and from his medicines he chose a small vial, and from it he filled a hypodermic and thrust it into the patient's left arm. Then, putting down the needle, he took the man's wrist again. The pulse under his fingers cluttered once or twice and then grew stronger. Now we are starting a new section, and this section tells us what will Dr. Sado and his wife do with uh, the man. Okay, let's see. This man will live in spite of all, he said to Hana and sighed. So the sigh, heaving a sigh, it shows that though he wanted the man to die, but then as a professional, he was forced to save him. Now the scene changes. Uh, the young man woke so weak, his blue eyes so terrified when he perceived where he was, that Hana felt compelled to apologize. So as the man, began perceiving the surroundings, he became terrified because obviously he realized that he was in a Japanese household. She herself served him, for none of the servants would enter the room. When she came in the first time, she saw him summon his small strength to be prepared for some fearful thing. So obviously, as a prisoner of war, he was, you see, quite habitual of facing tortures. Now, all these are parts of war. Now, these tortures are actually violations of human law. That is humanitarian law, human rights. So, it is such things, these things also move the couple to help the American soldier. Don't be afraid, she begged him softly. How come you speak English? He gasped. I was a long time in America, she replied. She saw that he wanted to reply to that, but he could not, and so she knelt and fed him gently from a porcelain spoon. He ate unwillingly, but still he ate. Now you will soon be strong, she said, not liking him and yet moved to comfort him. This passion of humanity always remains with the couple. Though they don't like him, still they are moved, especially Hannah, moved to comfort him because they know that he is suffering. He needs the help of another human being. He did not answer. When Sado came in the third day after the operation, he found the young man sitting up, his face bloodless with the effort. Lie down, Sado cried. Do you want to die? He forced the man down gently and strongly and examined the wound. You may kill yourself if you do this sort of thing, he scolded. What are you going to do with me? The boy muttered. He looked just now barely 17. Are you going to hand me over? For a moment, Sado did not answer. He finished his examination and then pulled the silk quilt over the man. I do not know myself what shall I do with you, He said, I ought, of course, to give you to the police. You are a prisoner of war. No, do not tell me anything. He put up his hand as he saw the young man was about to speak. Do not even tell me your name unless I ask it. They looked at each other for a moment, and then the young man closed his eyes and turned his face to the wall. Okay, he whispered, his mouth a bitter line. Outside the door, Hana was waiting for Sado. He saw at once that she was in trouble. Sado, Yumi tells me the servants feel they cannot stay if we hide this man here anymore. She said, she tells me they are saying that you and I were so long in America that we have forgotten to think of our own country first. They think we like Americans. It is not true, Sado said harshly. Well, it was a kind of a big jolt to Sado. He obviously could not tolerate it because the servants said that they didn't love their country. They didn't think of their country first, and that they liked Americans. It was a huge blow to, I mean, moral blow to Sado, and that's why he said harshly that it's not true, and continues, Americans are our enemies, but I have been trained not to let a man die if I can help it. The servants cannot understand this, she said anxiously. Yes, he agreed. So that was the problem. He was trained to, help a man live as long as it was possible. Neither seemed able to say more, and somehow the household dragged on. The servants grew more watchful. Their courtesy were as careful as ever, but their eyes were cold upon the pair to whom they were hired. This means that they did not have that kind of warmth and affection which they used to have. Uh, Look how much of problems this couple is facing just because they are doing an act of humanity. Moreover, look at the hatred, you know, hatred among the people during the time of war, that they cannot even, a common man cannot even tolerate Hana and Sado trying to help a wounded man because he was American. Now the servants are talking amongst themselves. It is clear what our master ought to do with old, the old gardener said one morning. He had worked with flowers all his life and had been a specialist in moss. For Sado's father, he had made one of the finest moss gardens in Japan, sweeping the bright green carpet constantly so that not a leaf or a pine needle marred the velvet of its surface. My old master's son knows very well what he ought to do, he now said, pinching a bud from a bush as he spoke. When the man was so near death, why did he not let him bleed? That young master is so proud of his skill to save life that he saves any life. The cook said contemptuously. She split a fowl's neck skillfully and held the fluttering bird. and let its blood flow into the roots of a wisteria vine. Blood is the best of fertilizers, and the old gardener would not let her waste a drop of it. It is the children of whom we must think, Yumi said sadly. What will be their fate if their father is condemned as a traitor? They did not try to hide what they said from the ears of Hannah as she stood arranging Day's flowers in the veranda nearby, and she knew they spoke on purpose that she might hear. That they were right, she knew too, in most of her being, but there was another part of her which she herself could not understand. Yes, this part was the humanitarian part, you see, that was forcing him to help the American. It was not sentimental liking of the prisoner. Um, she had come to think of him as a prisoner. She had not liked him even yesterday when he had said in his impulsive way, "Anyway, let me tell you that my name is Tom." He had only she had only bowed her little distant bow. She saw hurt in his eyes, but she did not wish to assuage it. Indeed, he was a great trouble in this house. As for Sado, every day he examined the wound carefully. The last stitches had been pulled out this morning, and the young man would in a fortnight's time be as well as ever. Sado went back to his office and carefully typed a letter to the chief of police reporting the whole matter. On the 21st of February, an escaped prisoner was washed up on the shore in front of my house. So far, he typed, and then he opened a secret drawer of his desk and put the unfinished report into it, so he couldn't complete it. On the seventh day after that, two things happened. In the morning, the servants left together, their belongings tied in large square cotton kerchiefs. When Hannah got up in the morning, nothing was done. The house was not clean, and the food not prepared, and she knew what it meant. She was dismayed and even terrified, but her pride as a mistress would not allow her to show it. Instead, she inclined her head gracefully when they appeared before her in the kitchen, and she paid them off, and thanked them for all that they had done for her. They were crying, but she did not cry. The cook and the gardener had served Sado since he was a little boy in his father's house, and Yumi cried because of the children. She was so grieving that after she had gone, she ran back to Hana. "If the baby misses me too much tonight, send for me. I am going to my own house, and you know where it is." "Thank you," Hannah said, smiling. But she told herself she would not send for Yumi. However, the baby cried. She made the breakfast, and Sado helped with the children. Neither of them spoke of the servants beyond that beyond the fact that they were gone. But after Hana had taken morning food to the prisoner, she came back to Sado. Why is it we cannot see clearly what we ought to do? She asked him. Even the servants see more clearly um, than we do. Why are we different from other Japanese? Sado did not answer, but a little later he went into the room where the prisoner was and said brusquely, "Today you may get up on your feet. I want you to stay up only for 5 minutes at a time. Tomorrow you may try it twice as much, twice as long. It would be well that you get back your strength as quickly as possible." He saw the flicker of terror on the young man's face that was still very pale. Okay. The boy murmured. So, as we use flicker of hope, so we use flicker of terror. Flicker, as I told you, is otherwise unsteady lights going on and off. But we use it as, in a figurative sense, as a flicker of terror or flicker of hope. उम्मीद की किरण या खौफ. Evidently, he was determined to say more. "I feel I ought to thank you, doctor, for having saved my life." "Don't thank me too early," Sado said coldly. He saw the flicker of terror at again in the boy's eyes, terror as unmistakable as an animal's. The scars on his neck were crimson for a moment. Those scars, what were they? Sado did not ask. In the afternoon, the second thing happened. Hana, working hard on unaccustomed labor, saw a messenger come to the door in official uniform. Her hands went weak, and she could not draw her breath. The servants must have told already. She then she ran to Sado, gasping, unable to utter a word. But by then the messenger had simply followed her through the garden, and there he stood. She pointed at him helplessly. Sado looked up from his book. He was in his office, the other partition of which was thrown open to the southern to the garden for the southern sunshine. Now it's another new section which is which tells us whether Dr. Sado be arrested on charge of harboring an enemy. "What is it?" he asked the messenger, and then he rose, seeing the man's uniform. "You are to come to the palace," the man said. "The old general is in pain again." "Oh," Hana breathed. "Is that all?" "All?" the messenger exclaimed. "Is it not enough?" "Indeed it is," she replied. "I'm very sorry." Actually, Hana had thought that she had come to arrest Sado. That is why she was much relieved to hear that he had come to send for or to call for Sado to attend the general. When came in to say goodbye, she was in the kitchen, but doing nothing. The children were asleep, and she sat merely resting for a moment, more exhausted from her fright than from work. I thought they had come to arrest you, she said. He gazed down into her anxious eyes. I must get rid of this man for your sake, he said in his distress. Somehow I must get rid of him. Sado goes to see the general, and the two talk. Remember, Sado has told everything about the man. Of course, the general said weakly, I understand fully, but that is because I once took a degree in Princeton. So few Japanese have. I care nothing for the man, Excellency, Sado said, but having operated on him with such success, yes, 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 and the general said, it only um, makes me feel you more indispensable to me. That is, the general realized that how important Sado was for him because he is so expert that he's operated on the wounded man so successfully, and so obviously the general, would need an operation. Evidently, you can save anyone. You are so skilled. You say you think I can stand one more such attack as I have had today? Not more than one, Sado said. Then certainly I can allow nothing to happen to you. So you see the attitude of the general. The general said with anxiety. His long, pale Japanese face became expressionless, which meant that he was in deep thought. You cannot be arrested, the general said, closing his eyes, so he realized that somehow Sado must not be arrested, otherwise, whenever he needs his operation, he would be in trouble. Suppose you were condemned to death, and next day I had to have my operation. There are other surgeons, Excellency, Sado suggested. None I trust, the general replied. The best ones have been trained by Germans and would consider the operation successful even if I died. I do not care for their point of view. He sighed. It seems a pity that we cannot better combine the German ruthlessness with the American sentimentality. Then you could turn your prisoner over to execution, and yet I could be sure you would not be you would not murder me while I was unconscious. The general laughed. He had an unusual sense of humor. As a Japanese, could you combine these two foreign elements? He asked. Sado smiled. I am not quite sure, he said, but for your sake I would be willing to try. Excellency, the general shook his head. I had just not be the test case, he said. He felt suddenly weak and overwhelmed with the cares of his life as an official in times such as these when repeated victory brought great responsibilities all over the South Pacific. It is very unfortunate that this man should have been washed up on your doorstep, said uh, He said irritably. I feel it so myself, Sado said gently. It would be best if he could be quietly killed, the general said, not by you, but by someone who uh, does not know, whom you does not, sorry, who you does not know him. Uh, who does not know him, there is something wrong with the syntax. Anyway, what he means is that the person should be killed by somebody who is not known to Sado. I have my own private assassins. Suppose I uh, send two of them your house uh, tonight, or better, any night. You need not know anything about it. It is now warm. What would be more natural than that you should leave the outer partition of the white man's room open to the garden while he sleeps? Certainly, it would be very natural. Sado agreed. In fact, it is so left open every night. Good, the general said, yawning. They are very capable assassins. They make no noise and they know the trick of inward bleeding. If you like, I can even have them remove the body. Sado considered. That perhaps would be the best, Excellency. He agreed, thinking of Hana. He left the general's presence and then came home thinking over the plan. In this way, the whole thing would be taken out of his hands. He would tell Hana nothing since she would be timid at the age, uh, at the idea of assassins in the house, and yet certainly such persons were essential in an absolute state such as Japan was. How else could rulers deal with those who opposed them? Just a minute. Yes, it's almost the time. Um, okay, let's stop here. We will continue in the next, you know, next video and try to finish the lesson. Okay, thank you very much.
Stop button.